Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. This week we return to speed paints and illustrations following last week's bout of art block, since I did find inspiration to return to drawing, just as I knew that I would when taking some days break at the end of last week. So without much delay, I have nothing to really say here, so let's just get straight into it and the ideas and topics of today, shall we? Following last week and its troubles, I decided to get out and do something else for a while. A friend and I ended up then going bowling, and we actually had a lot of fun, even if I wasn't exactly good at it. Yet, on the way there, as we were talking about this, that and the other, I realised that the trees nearby were already changing colours, and quite significantly so too. It wasn't really just a leaf or two, if that makes sense. I mean, we drove down this street that was lined with orange trees and leaves along the ground. And for a moment, I had to check if the date on my phone was correct. It looked like a perfect, picturesque autumn road, with pleasant weather that wasn't too hot or cold, and piles and rows of gathered leaves that it was almost unbelievable to see so many still on the trees at the same time. Trees themselves, mind you, that were an array of vibrant oranges and yellows, some even starting to turn red. Then other areas, only a corner away, vibrantly green with flowers and plants flourishing. Everything was vibrant and people were outside tending to bright gardens with an array of coloured flowers still in full bloom. The leaves were green, expected for this part of the year, and everything visually read as normal, tolerable, and a summer's day. There wasn't a single hint of autumn anywhere, and honestly I didn't think much of it that day. We sort of laughed it off, went bowling and ignored it, more in favour of other conversations and focus since we haven't caught up in a short while either. Yet then went out with someone else. I began to realise it had been getting darker a bit sooner, and the nights are already getting somewhat colder some nights, more than what I would think for this time of year. The signs of autumn were a little more present the more I looked around, and it was something that I couldn't shake from that moment. For a point of reference in all of this as to why it has captured this sort of attention, the trees don't normally turn until October. Last year they were closer to November really, as I recall talking about that too with a friend last year when it happened. He is one who tends to love crunchy leaves and had mentioned in passing that it was disappointing almost that they hadn't fallen when we were sure that they should have. Yet, as far as I'm really able to take notice, things like the leaves falling more typically happen towards October, late October, more than anything else, just going off memory. Yet they're already changing and it's been the last few weeks of August. So I was kind of inspired to look at the changing seasons and the passing nature of time once more, but in a slightly different capacity. I've done it before in paintings, characters and illustrations of both. So why not something new? As said, time is a topic that I will return to as much as I can. It's something that I never quite grow tired of, you see. So I wanted to glance at this the very least. And this wasn't the only source of inspiration, however. You see, I may have mentioned before that I do quite enjoy musicals, and one of my joint favourites amongst these is Hadestown. It is something I could talk about for hours without getting bored of it, and I really love its themes and messages. Now, I can't unpack the entire musical here, yet in the first act, the audience is introduced to the seasons being off and wrong in some sense. Mainly how winter is long and harsh, summers are short. Persephone is spending too much time in Hadestown, due to plot and character arcs and motivations, which is negatively impacting everyone up top. This detail is sort of what leads to everything else in the musical as a sort of domino effect. Seasons are strange, times are hard, and people are desperate doing all they can to survive. Naturally, with a musical based on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, it doesn't end so well for those two characters. Yet it was one of the main inspirations for this piece as well, due to the early presence of these themes. It wasn't anything sudden either. I had been listening to the album, again, and got to the second song, titled Any Way the Wind Blows, which is early on to introduce the characters to the audience and to kind of get across who they are. At this point, they're still making you comfortable with the people and their ideas. This song quickly goes into Eurydice explaining their situation. It outlines how she's cold, the weather isn't right. It sort of sets up their worldview and, with the other characters, warns you that something will come, that it's a tragedy for a reason. Yet the seasons being wrong have led to everything she sings about, everything that explains her motive. It kind of does the same for Orpheus in that song too, to a bit of a lesser degree. Explain his worldview and give context as to who he is what I mean. But that isn't so relevant for what I'm discussing here, so back on topic. There is a line in the song from Eurydice that the weather ain't the way it used to be. And that kind of brought back the thoughts I had about the trees and the journey from days prior. It brought it back and sort of shaded it into a new light, something that I could work with creatively. Some days are so solidly summer, for example the most recent Monday of this week. For reference, I'm referring to the 25th, as we had been out for my birthday that day, and it was hot. It was summer, and for some moments, I did wonder if I was looking at things too much, or wondered if it was worth creating this piece off the inspiration that I did in the first place. Thought that maybe I was just looking too hard for something that wasn't there. Yet I did kind of stop those thoughts, since, well, I wanted to make it off this thought, and I did. It may have been warm that day, yet the previous week still looked closer to autumn over anything else. It is summer. It makes sense that we get hot days and so on. Yet it doesn't change the autumn street around the corner, or the subtle signs that tie better to a few weeks from now than this moment. So, yeah. Moment of doubt aside, I like this thought and the idea. I was pushed to explore this idea and this theme based on a few things that I've mentioned. I was pushed to unpack how they turn, how things continue to flow and change over time, and I wanted to look at that. So, what then? Inspirations was established, and I had the idea. I hadn't had doubts at the point of starting it, not the ones of its worth at least, but more doubts about how I'd managed to convey this and actually execute the idea. So let's look at the process itself here then. First up, as always, is the very rough sketching phase. The part of the idea where it could still be abandoned in favour of anything else, since it really may not work out like you envision. Yet I had a small sketchbook on my desk and scribbled something out. Then another one, and then another one. The first few were a mess. They featured an analogue clock before anything else, winter at 12 and summer at 6. But denoting this in that format wasn't quite right. Looking at those sketches kind of reminded me of the weather marker at the start of Balamory from when I was younger. Just overcomplicated if nothing else. But it did push me to look at other variants of this idea. Some of which did have potential too. Pocket watches? Maybe. I might yet return to them. Digital clock? Not quite. It didn't have the right feel to it or the environment. I mean, maybe. I could possibly take it in a speculative or story route more than anything in the future. Maybe look at it as a symbol of technology and the future, or whatever route opens up if I do go back to looking at it a bit more. But for right now, it wasn't right. So honestly, what I did was rest my head on the desk since it was late and I was being dramatic, and turned to the hourglass from an old school project. I got it for primary source photography and have kept it on my desk since, as I kind of like it. It's fun more than anything else, and there isn't a real need to be rid of it. Yet it led me towards the hourglass route of exploration. And again, this area of sketching had been vast. I began sketching the hourglass I have, sort of doing it from observation before adding elements of the seasons and what is seen in this video. There had been the pillars and the base as sections being taken over by natural worlds around them. This is actually where the nature and environment came from, since any other ideas kind of prioritised the timepiece and the hourglass itself, without really looking more at what it would be surrounded by until later. I just focused on how to convey the inside where the sand should be, and then, with the pillars being taken over, started to look at the idea of bushes and plants surrounding it. Then I decided that the pillars and supports were too unnatural for this idea. They took too much attention and blocked too much of the actual focus, so I removed them. I instead chose that there would be fewer straight lines in this piece, and I could focus more on the curve of the hourglass and the forms of nature around it with leaves and so on, since it better conveyed the idea that I had intended. It spoke more to the element I was targeting, and removing them overcame the issue I had been having about it looking like someone had just left an hourglass within this space. So with all of that established, I sort of quickly came to the rough sketch that I wanted to work with, and ultimately could move into the digital phase, so I could detail and expand upon this idea a little bit more, just to kind of look at exactly what my goals would be for it. These details focused on how to convey each season, and what I would be looking at as a code for them all. I could focus on the falling leaves in the middle of the glass for autumn, work out exactly how I would manage the snow at the top of it all, since I haven't really worked with snow until now. I could look at areas like the top of the glass and everything else until I had a better vision for where it would be going, and I did borrow this from other ideas as well. For example, the analog clock ideas saw clouds around the edge that kind of changed based on the seasons. Greys were more reserved for winter, as if it were snowing. Autumn and spring saw them with tints of grey, yet mainly white, as they are known for rain here. Then, finally, summer saw breaks in the clouds and more white tones for the clear skies. Here, for this one, I couldn't use the idea in full, but I could quite happily break sections of it, and those sections were mainly used in areas like the top of the hourglass as a sort of origin point to most of it. Yeah, I will get into the details in a short while. For now, sketching the details was still sort of kept loose. The core of the sketch had been leaves and natural forms. The forest sits around the hourglass, and it is flourishing and overgrown. I had been contemplating if I went all in on the seasons being early, it being wrong that this is the way things look for quite some time. Yet I kind of decided at this point to follow the theme of seasons and their change, before looking at the inspiration for it all again. Looking at how to convey the change as happening too soon would have led to me changing the idea, when this is interesting to me at the moment. Is it what I spoke of? No. But all I said was still a starting point, and I did try to bring it in again a little bit later. After all, at the end of the sketch I looked at maybe including text. I did it a little in the past for projects and school, yet I never quite try it in my personal work or things that I do for fun here. And part of me is often conflicted over it. There's a section of me that wants to, thinks that it could be interesting to explore and include, even if it is as a supporting and subtle element. Yet then the other part remembers that I didn't usually enjoy it in the past, and did it by requirements before anything else. This time, I let myself trial a degree of it, to reintroduce the idea that this is all too soon, though again I will expand on that when I get into the details later. For now in the sketch, I decided to just move into the flat colours to sort of try my best at starting this and exploring it, without getting caught up on what exactly I would be doing in the later sections. And for the flats, I began mainly by setting aside the colours I connect to the seasons as a start for the visual cues I would be using throughout it all. The first of these is winter. Naturally, these are cold colours like whites and icy blues. Second up then came autumn, where I laid out a few oranges and reds, basing them off the colours that leaves tend to turn in this time. Third was summer, which I started off as yellow, though it did also tend to take on elements of green as well. one pulling from the sun and the other off plants and nature that is often thriving in this season. Finally was then spring. I don't know why, but I did gravitate towards pink. I think it's because it's bright, it's cheerful in a way, and it is a common flower colour seen within this time as they flourish and grow. From there, as a basis, I could then look at joining them all together with the other tones. Brown is one of these other tones. It's the colour of trees and is kind of present in all seasons in a sense. Spring, dirt and gardening, where things grow from. During autumn, the leaves after so long turn brown. Winter and summer, it's a little bit more of a stretch, yet the browns are similar to the seasons before. Summer ties to gardens and dirt and trees. Winter is more mud that has frozen over. The second of these colours that I chose for tying it all together is green for similar ideas. In spring and summer it is the most prominent through leaves and plants around. Yet at the start of autumn, normally, there is a lot of green before things start trying to change. It's really only winter where it isn't as common, with most of the plants dying or becoming frosted over. Yet I still went with the green since it is there for 3 out of the 4 that I'm working with. It just meant I was a little bit more inclined to add yellow lighting to the green areas, to kind of include it maybe trying to look a bit colder, or as if things are starting to try and change to account for this. By this, the lighting and orange sections also kind of make it look as if it is changing. The environment around is more autumn before anything else, or it is at least heading that way, whilst the hourglass in the centre shows that this is starting to reach that season too. It visually sort of implies that the surroundings are like this as the hourglass is so far along, and when it continues into winter, the space around the glass will reflect this. Right now the colours all work and further hint towards this idea. Now though, all of that said, I can finally begin to get into details of this piece and expand on what I was thinking for most of it in particular. I have touched on parts as I went along here, but there is still a lot to touch on and sort of go back over. First and foremost of all of this, I want to discuss the details used for each season outside of just the colour scheme I had been looking at. After all, I wasn't settled on this for quite some time, and it by far was the section that I had the most sketches for total by the end of this process. In the early ideas alone, they took all forms of appearance and ideas that ranged heavily in most aspects, kind of before I found one that I wanted to settle on. And I will just kind of run my way through them in a sort of order that makes sense. Go from the top of the glass down. So from the top is winter. I usually associate it with the cold, and when everything has sort of died, with the chill carrying through the air. The greenery still remaining is usually muddy or frozen, with it being increasingly rare the further winter goes that you would find some field that's fine to walk through, or green. Otherwise, it's the season where indoors has a greater appeal, with piles of blankets and hot drinks. There are layers of clothes, and it is a season I quite enjoy. I prefer cold to hot any time of year, and I don't have to deal with harsh lights that are too bright from the sun otherwise. In terms of weather, it is usually raining, though there are a few years where we have seen snow as well, though across the board it does tend to be just chilly and cold. In terms of visual cues, I leant heavily into the snow theme. I decided that weather and visuals of the season would be best to rely on here, and snow is really the main thing that can visually differentiate it from anything else. It's why the top of it is white, that section meant to resemble snow before anything else. Yet I did approach it with a less is more attitude, where overdoing it and overshading it only made it look less and less like snow the further I worked on it. Shading it too much made it look grey or too blue, so it did end up fairly simple in that respect. Otherwise, for winter, I relied on the clouds up top. For me, at least, I mostly remember winter with the cloud-filled skies and the nights where it may be hard to see any stars or the moon due to them. It also made sense in this context too. The clouds answer for where the snow came from inside the glass, even if it wasn't the top priority. More than anything else, I wanted to ensure that the space felt full and active. It also answered the problem that the top of the glass had been giving me up to this point. It also gave me the chance to include an impression of snow falling slowly and subtly. Well, maybe not subtly. The little dots that float between the clouds and the piled snow, which had been a nice little touch I thought helped tie it all together, and also sort of make it a single space a little bit more. Yet it then takes me to autumn and spring, which kind of work off a similar idea. See, I view these both as transition seasons. Spring is cold and gets warmer slowly as things come back to life for summer. It's rainy, yes, and sometimes the day are a little bit less predictable, but it's part of the change from winter to summer, as there has to be a gradual shift. In autumn, it's getting colder. Nights begin to creep in sooner too, and there's a little bit more of a breeze that carries the start of a chill. It too is often raining. That is quite common in most seasons. Yet it is everything building up to the start of winter. So these are a transition. They're a change and they're in the middle of the glass. For autumn, it's the leaves piling below winter that stops the snow from starting to slip through just yet. Spring is the subtle pink flowers that tie between the leaves and fall into summer. I will admit that spring isn't too evident here. I did notice this and kind of settle with it, since I felt that it would be better as my focus is on the shift to colder months this time. Yet there is still a hint and a touch of it present. It just doesn't make sense that it would be both changing to spring and autumn at the same time. See, I sort of thought somewhat about how the hourglass would work or be read. In one route, the glass would be done when winter fell from the top half to the bottom, freezing over summer and everything else in the process. Yet when it started again, the winter would be the first section to fall into the other side. The only issue I encountered here had been that turning it would also mean that autumn fell next, then summer, and then spring. So in this route I kind of had the middle as the appropriate transition season. Winter to spring would be flowers and then autumn after summer. Yet this kind of logic had a few more flaws as well. My other line of logic made a little bit more sense, in my mind at least. The hourglass may never be done or empty all the way. Summer would remain in their half, winter in theirs, and the two would never mix, so to speak. In this one, winter is more about the snow clouds and the snow piles up when it is rotated that way. If flipped, there would be a layer of snow at the base instead, and it would mean that spring is coming in. In this route, it is only spring and autumn changing between the halves before it would be reset. Again, if flipped the other way, with winter on the bottom, it would kind of show the change towards summer. At the moment, this route makes the most sense as to how this may work, as long as I've not gotten my logic backwards in explaining it, which is very plausible. With those two said, summer is last. This is the open field on the bottom as I tie it more to this. It's fields and sun and plants. It's a time where days are too hot and inside is 10 times worse than anything outside could be, where the afternoon sun through the windows only serves to make a room near uninhabitable until night time. Honestly, to me, it is the season where night is most productive, as it could be too hot to sleep, but at least cool enough to think once more. Safe to say that I do have a bias. Yet the field is simple. It gets the point across and has the sign of life seen through it, and the environment that is then located between. The grass is green, the flowers of spring present and thriving in the field, and bushes by the back to properly convey how alive everything may be. This was actually the easiest part to work out, as summer can be shown in opposition to winter. The snow is piled high, the clouds are grey. In comparison, the field is calm and alive. It's green without a hint of anything going wrong or turning. Between the two, the flowers and the leaves. One for life coming back, and one for the decay brought by the cold. So, the second key detail, the environment. This, as said, was worked out second, as I mainly experimented with seeing what may work and what wouldn't. I wanted to play before settling on anything, as I had a feeling it would have come together easier, once I was sure that I liked the contents of the hourglass and went from there. I mean, before this, I hadn't been sure if I wanted space in a galaxy that took more of a cosmic route, or if I liked the nature aspect. As I am sure you can see, the nature element won. It just made a little bit more sense with the overall theme and idea, whilst also tying better into the main subject. Besides, I could then go through and add little nods to the content of the glass as well. This is mainly through the falling leaves, small dots and flower-like forms in the background around it. From there it was a matter of lighting and shading, adding the yellow hue to imply the change before anything else. And yes, I did have some spaces where I changed the plant colours. The yellow on the glass can be a subtle nod to summer, or to changing leaves. The orange on the branches were then intended as a more obvious nod to autumn, with that then being the chosen colour for it. This was for one main reason. It had looked better before anything else, but also it stopped there being too much conflict in the environment caused by everything being green bushes and leaves and so on. I could instead make the sections something different visually. Now, in this area, I did have one main decision that I never really settled on. I have seen other art pieces where they blur the foreground to better draw the eye back to the focal point, and it has been something I wanted to try for some time now. Though, as I'm sure you can assume, I've never felt that the moment or image was right to try it on. I've not had the chance, so I decided this time to just go for it. To just give it a go and see where it ends up. That's why there are 4 outcomes here. There's text versus no text, more on that next, but also a blur versus no blur option. Personally, I am leaning towards no text and no blur, but I am also biased towards it, since I usually avoid one and haven't tried the other before, so I can't really work out if I am just genuinely preferring it, and my comfort zone, or if it is just again, my comfort zone. It happens a lot where I do pick a safer outcome after trying something different and new, and it is a habit I'm trying to break. But all outcomes are showing at the end, so let me know what you think is the better one. It would be interesting to know. Anyway, as previously mentioned, the next detail up had been text. Another experiment done as it felt fun, and I thought it would be interesting to see how it came together. Now, there are a few things to this one though, then they are all pretty short. First up is the layout. I had 2 versions that I started with before settling on one. See, the top and bottom layout had been my original intent, and the one that I felt would fit it all best. Yet it really only worked on the non-blurry version, which meant that I came to look at other options for that one in particular. It's where I ended up with it all pretty central to the page around the curves of the hourglass, and I did prefer that one. To then keep them both the same, and to further reduce more variants that I would have as options, I did decide to mirror it on both too and have the text in the same location universally. And it also did work well, so there wasn't really too much lost. Now, the second part of the detail had been what I actually chose to include and say. As mentioned before, Hadestown had been part of the inspiration for this idea and piece. I was working off the idea of seasons being out of balance or coming too soon, so I kept it simple. It is a line used in the musical, but it also works as a vague saying that implies more about the hourglass than what is present. It implies it moves too quickly, that it's happening ahead of normal. But it's simple and it works. And yes, I had ideas for far more complicated sayings or implications, but it just didn't work as well. The simple saying was best as it adds before it takes away. It doesn't pull too much attention from the world around it like it otherwise could have, if I'd maybe chosen to fill it with more complicated phrases or more words and sentences. It also meant that I was relying on it a little bit less. I can debate the role in the piece since it isn't crucial for the image to make sense, as the text itself in the simple saying only nudges towards my initial thoughts that sparked everything, and I do like that about it. It can be there or it cannot be there. But even without the text, they can still kind of get the gist as to what is going on or fill in the gaps themselves. Yet on versions with the text, there is a little bit of a guide. It doesn't tell you everything, not what it means or refers to, just that whatever it is happening to be early. Now, there are also probably a few other things that I could cover and say. However, I think that I have run out of time here once again. To just kind of conclude here and wrap everything up, I do really like a lot of the details that I chose to include, and even if I'm not convinced on the text just yet, it does still make a nice detail overall. So as we are out of time, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have enjoyed this week's drawing and discussion. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. For now, however, this is goodbye.